So, which one's better? Raw 3D print or painted 3D print? So, you've probably made it to this video somehow by wanting to make Daredevil's helmet. You wanted to know how hard it is, how much it's going to cost you, and is it genuinely worth it, or do you just find something off Etsy that maybe works? Now, in this video, I'm going to be taking you through making a raw printed helmet. So this is just straight off the 3D printer, a little bit of black paint, and done. To something that went off the printer, took a lot of sanding, filling, priming, sanding, filling, wet sanding, then painting, clear coating, and adding some black details. Then at the end of the video, we're going to be ranking these in 3 different classes. The first one being is the speed. How quickly were you able to get a helmet on your wall to look at? Then the second will be the price. Which one's the cheapest? And then lastly is which one's going to be the best. Then we'll determine and hopefully give you guys a good enough opinion on which one is right for you. So without further ado, the first thing we need is some 3D files. Alright, so for the files, we are going to be using this channel sponsor, Do3D. Now, for these files, I have picked the Born Again version, simply because it has the plain variant, which we're going to need, and the textured as well, so which we're also going to need. It also comes with like a magnetic back, which makes it really easy to put on and off the helmet. It's also got the lens, which are separated, so we can resin print the lens for the printed versions, and we can just FDM print in the normal colors for the raw printed helmets. And then we've also got the lens / visor pieces that are also separate, and we've got 2 variants of them. The first one being the solid one, so we can resin print this in like a clear red and then buff and shine it. And we've also got the mesh version so that you don't have to, you can just print it straight on an FDM printer. These files also do come with a stencil if we need one. I'm not going to be using it because I'm too lazy to do that. But other than that, that's pretty much everything. You can pick these files up on do3d.com along with any Star Wars, Marvel, DC, suits, helmets, props, swords, anything you can kind of think of that you might want to 3D print, Do3D's probably got it. I've been using Do3D long before they had reached out to me. I've made 2 Iron Man suits, part of Mandalorian suits. I've got helmets, swords, props, and they've all been from Do3D, and they've been amazing to work with. So if you're interested in making these Daredevil helmets or kind of any other helmets, props, suits, if you use CRE8 at checkout, you'll get 20% off thanks to Do3D. Massive thank you to Do3D for supporting this channel and sending out these files. Without further ado, let's get on with a build montage. I will not be going through all like the sanding and the filling and the resin and all of that sort of stuff, mostly because the video will be like over 3 hours otherwise. So just know that I am going to be sanding the parts at 80 grit sandpaper and filling them and priming them and then painting them in the designated colors of stuff. And then the raw prints, I'm just hitting print on the printer with their colors. And I'll also explain the lens and the blacking outlines later in the video. So without further ado, let's get on with the time-lapse. Alright, so we're going to go through these black lines really quickly. Now, I will explain this at the end of the video during the comparisons, because I've already filmed that and I wanted to refilm this because it never made any sense to me. But there's a lot of ways that we can actually do these black details. The first of which is using a Sharpie. The first thing we're going to need to know is these raw printed helmets are going to be a real pain to do the black lines. The reason for this is because there's so many channels and valleys, because of the layer lines, the paint is going to be prone to being very stuck in there, making it virtually impossible to get the paint out of those layer lines. So when we do the raw printed helmets, we're going to have to be super careful. So that's why I'm going to recommend using some black paint. Now, you're going to need to be super patient with doing this exact step because you're going to not really want to make that mistake. Because if one little slip up, it's going to get stuck into the layer lines and going to be virtually impossible to get out, and it's going to smudge sort of everywhere. Whereas our painted versions, we can kind of use anything. And I'm also still going to be recommending some acrylic black paint. The reason for this is if we paint it, we make a little mistake, we're going to use some wet paper towel and wipe it off. And that way, the water is going to take off the high spots, unless you shove it in the lower spots. But it's going to make a much cleaner details, which you'll see at the end of the video. So you could go with a Posca or a Sharpie. They do pretty much the exact same job, I have found. But the Sharpie, I find, gives you a little bit more control, unless you buy a really fine Posca pen, and they're about the same price. So I will explain you and show you at the end of the video all of the little mistakes I have already gone through making the raw printed helmets, doing all these black details, because they're a real pain. But definitely, I would still recommend going some black acrylic paint. Steer clear of any of that Tamiya paints. The reason for that is they do need a harsher chemical to remove them, and the problem is that also is prone to removing paint as well. So if you do, say, the painted helmet, you may end up actually pulling that paint off. So definitely go with the acrylic paint, but we'll go over that in the end of the video. Go through the lens now. Now, there's 4 different options I've got here, and each one is actually going to be in the helmets at the final end, so you can kind of see it compared to the helmet and the lens itself. The first one I'm going to be starting off with is just taking a really cheap pair of sunglasses. Now, I don't know how well you're going to be able to find some red sunglasses, but if you manage to find them, they do look really good. This is my Blue Beetle helmet, and the lens in these ones are just a really cheap pair of the color shifting sunglasses. Now, these look perfect in this type of helmet, but obviously with Daredevil, we just want them a darkish red. Now, sunglasses may come in, red, yellow, orange tints, but if you can find a pair that you like, definitely try that option because it looks really good. The second option is just taking a piece of acrylic and putting a little bit of red Sharpie on one side and the other, and then clear coating it. This pretty much does the exact same thing as the sunglasses. It's the same material, also a lot easier. And you can see they definitely look quite good. For how cheap and easy this is to actually do. And this one's a really good option if you don't want to resin print them or find glasses or something. And this one's also very easy to replace if they ever break. The next one is going to be probably the simplest one of all of them, because they've already come with the 3D files, and that is just printing the mesh lens that comes with the file. Now, these ones are designed so you can see through them. They're obviously a little bit harder because obviously it's mesh. You're going to be having to look through the very small holes within the mesh, but they do look really good. I mean, as you can see, they fit in the lens perfectly, so you're not having to cut and edit anything like you would with the sunglasses, and they just fit in and look perfect, as DR3D have already gone through the whole process of making them look good. So that one is another very easy option. I just printed these in silk red on my highest setting on my printer. I think for a set of 2 was only an hour and a half. So definitely a very quick and easy way to do some lens. Then the final one is going to be resin printing them. Now, I wouldn't recommend doing this because obviously you are going to need a resin printer, a wash and cure station. You're going to need the resin, some dye, and a bit of a workspace, which you've got to have to keep clean. Obviously, you could send these 3D files out to, say, Monocore 3D or PCBWay, but the problem is they're going to charge you a fair bit and also going to take a while. And if you want to just get the helmet up and on the wall, it's not the quickest or probably the easiest of the lot. Now, I have gone ahead and put all of the resin printed ones in my painted finished ones, simply because I have a resin printer on hand and I just prefer doing it that way. So pretty much that's it when it comes to lenses. There really isn't much of an option. There's obviously resin printing, which is going to take you a whole lot longer and a lot more money, and then all the way down to just seriously coloring a piece of acrylic. At this point, it really doesn't matter. If it does the job and it looks good, then that's what matters. So pretty much that's it with the helmets. We've got everything blacked out. We've got the helmets printed and painted. We've got lens, which I've actually still got to put in this one and put the back on. But other than that, let's get to the final test. Alright, so now that everything is printed, we're going to be going through the categories. The first one being the speed. Alright, so both helmets have the same print time because they're the same file, both of which taking 1 day, 3 hours. The raw printed helmet just has to be taken straight off the printer, print the lens, print the frames, and while those are printing, do the blackout lines. Other than that, about a day and maybe 5-6 hours. Then the helmets are complete. Where on the other hand, this had to be sanded, filled, primed, sanded, primed, filled, and then painted, clear coated, blacks. Then we had to resin print the lens, and then resin print the frames, and then assemble the whole thing. over that, it took around a week to do. Now, obviously this could go a lot quicker if you maybe just didn't worry as much about the layer lines and just kind of did once over, maybe relied on the filler. There are different ways that this can go faster, but for my method, it took around a week to do one of these helmets. So clearly, one day, 4 or 5 hours, a week. So we're gonna have to give this one to the raw printed helmets. The next category is the price. All right, so both helmets need to be 3D printed. I was able to print these about 500 grams each, so I could fit 2 helmets on one spool. But if you're doing them in different colors, you are gonna need to buy the different colored filaments. So then with a little bit of black paint and a paintbrush, which you can pick up super, super cheap, you're looking at around $35. On the other hand, the painted version is gonna cost a lot more. The first thing we're gonna need is some filament, followed by some sandpaper, probably a sander if you don't have an electric sander. That's more just on my opinion. It's going to save you a lot of time and get you a better quality. But if we skip that, then we're going to need some wet sandpaper to make the whole helmet nice and smooth. Now obviously this step is also optional, but it is going to leave a nicer result. We're going to need paint, we're going to need clear coat, we're going to need black paint, we're going to need a paintbrush, and maybe some magnets to make the back removable. So by the end of that, you're already looking at around $100+. So obviously a bit of a big difference between maybe $35, maybe $135 difference. The next category is the quality. Now this one's got a clear winner. So although the speed and the price to pump out one of these raw printed helmets, it comes at a cost. Now when you try and do this black paint with doing these lines, I did recommend earlier using a paintbrush. Now, the good thing with these paintbrushes is that it's not going to bleed through like the Sharpie does. As you can see on this one where it's bled straight around the horn, but the problem is because that paint is in the layer lines, they don't come out. This helmet was hand painted with the black, but the problem is if you don't have patience hand painting, it begins to bleed and stuff like this. And obviously the more it bleeds, the uglier it looks. But with the painted versions, because there's no layer lines, you can go through with some black acrylic and just paint in all these little details. If you make an accident, just a little wet paper towel, just wipe off the excess and then it's clean, allowing you to do these top details. So the quality has a definite clear winner. The paint can be more accurate rather than just some filament. And you're getting better quality and neatness with these black lines around the outside. Now obviously if you took the time to actually hand paint and you had expertise in hand painting and were very patient, this would look better, but I don't have the patience to hand paint. So although the black lines are super easy to paint on the painted helmets, the painted helmets do also come at a cost. As you can see, there's a big difference between my time and care into this one and this one compared to this one. Now, I have done this on purpose. Don't worry, I do actually sand my prints more than this. But as you can see, I didn't sand around this horn piece. I didn't sand up on here. There's a little bit of filler stuck around in here. And the quicker that you do this whole sanding process and don't take the time and care to do it, they're gonna not look as good as something that you put time and effort into. Now, obviously this step adds a lot of time to that speed category, but obviously when you're comparing it to an FDM print, this is obviously gonna be quicker. This is quicker than this, but this gives you the better quality. So the longer, more time you spend sanding, filling, priming, wet sanding, the better the helmet's going to look in the end, rather than something that's got all these little layer lines and swirls and mistakes all through them. So in the end of the quality, the painted versions are going to be far superior to your FDM version, but you also do need to take that time and care to make sure it looks really nice and smooth and finished, rather than something that looks rushed and forgotten about. And the last category is the ease. How many skills are you going to need to know to make one of these things? With just a simple raw 3D print, there's really not much skill needed at all. You're just clicking a couple buttons, sending it off to the 3D printers, and if you have a new 3D printer like the Bamboos or some of the high-end Crealities, the job's pretty much done for you. Whereas a couple years ago, you'd have to learn so many things just to get a print off the printer. Whereas the painted version, you're gonna need to know how to sand if you've never done it before. And you're also gonna need to know how to fill and take care of these helmets to make it have the best possible finish. For this, you just pull it straight off the printer and do a little bit of a black paint job, which anyone can kind of do. It's just a matter of time and care. And, well, but if you have done all this 3D printing, sanding, making props and effects before, that ease becomes easier. I know that for me, this took so much quicker than it would have a couple years ago when I first started. So basically, in the same amount of time, pump one of these out super easy because I know what I'm doing and I have the tools needed to be able to do this. So it depends on your experience. Do you have minimal experience, you've just bought your first 3D printer, or do you actually know what you're doing and you know how to make a prop? So I'm actually going to be giving it to both of these categories. Alright, so the raw printed wins, but really, does it? It does in some ways. Now, these are the textured Born Again version of helmets, both battle damaged. Now, as you can see, there's so much texture over these helmets that the layer lines disappear and the black paint looks perfect. And it's also on the top. Because all this texture is jagged and rigid, it's stopping all the paint seeping through the layer lines, meaning it looks so much cleaner, and it also hides all those layer lines, making it look even cleaner. I mean, you can just see on the tops of these alone, this silver shows the layer lines so much, whereas this can't see anything. And this was so much easier than just taking the raw printed helmets and painting them, and they look 100 times better. But you'll also notice that I did use a soldering iron to cut off this horn. Now, the reason I did this is because it looks more jagged and I really like how it looks because it looks more battle damaged and worn. And if you're someone who's just joined this hobby and doesn't want to use a soldering iron to cut and smell the lovely fumes of plastic, that's where DO3D comes in again. Now, this is DO3D's broken, damaged helmet version. Now, at the time of starting this video, this file wasn't yet released, but at the time of this video's release, it is. So, as you can see, the comparison between these two look perfect. Yet again, layer lines are hidden and it looks amazing. And we're able to paint all these black details perfectly. Alright, so in the end, we have the speed, the price, and the ease going to the raw printed helmets. Whereas the quality and the ease go to your painted version helmets. In my opinion, the quality far outweighs speed and the price of what I'm building. So in my case, the painted version is going to win in every category, but that may not be the same for you. But when we look at these sorts of helmets, which are all textured and damaged, these ones kind of win in every category because they're cheap, they're quick to do, the quality looks amazing, and they're super simple. So that kind of does it for this video. This is my first comparison test video, so I really am sort of figuring out as I go. But I do hope this gave a really good verdict between your raw prints to your painted prints. So massive thank you to DO3D for sending out these files and supporting this channel. And I do hope this gave a really clear understanding between these two helmets, and hopes you decide in maybe making a Daredevil helmet or any other helmet that you may be thinking of, either painting or FDM printing. So without further ado, let's see the final results.